Thank you, band. Morning, all. Excellent. I went to the opticians on Monday, and I was walking, and you go in, and there's a little receptionist, and there was a lady talking to the receptionist, and she was saying, you just couldn't make it up, could you? You just couldn't write it. And the receptionist looked a little bit taken aback, and I thought, oh, maybe her glasses have gone AWOL. And ironically, you can't find them in an optician's. And I kind of walked up, and then she looked round to me, and she went to me, you just can't write it, can you? And then she turned to the receptionist and said, he doesn't know. He doesn't know what I mean. He's got a good life, doesn't he? And then the kind of receptionist person ushered me quickly through. I was like, I'm really sorry about that. And then I heard her still kind of saying it, and then she left after a little while. And it kind of got me thinking, what's a good life? Partly because I was kind of thinking about this passage. She says to me, you don't know you've got a good life, but what's a good life? What are the essential elements of a good life? Particularly kind of in light of the passage that Caroline read to us earlier. Because I do have a good life, but how do I measure it? We sometimes use a happy life or a blessed life. Social media, I don't know if they still do now, I'm not on it much, #blessed. All over the shop. But what does it mean? What's your indicators of blessing? Health, probably. Family, relationships. School or career are going well. I've got a purpose. Maybe you look upon others and you go, they've got a good life. Mine doesn't seem to be quite as good. Maybe your view of what a good life is influences your view of God. If you think a good life is health and wealth and all these things, when you've got them, God is good. And we don't have them, maybe God's not so good. And maybe you're up and down like that. And what do you do if one of these things suddenly goes? What if a relationship breaks down? What if you lose your job? What if you're not well? Is your good life, is your blessed life suddenly gone? Maybe you're tired of a blessed life being temporary and fragile, like all those things I mentioned. Maybe you're looking for something a bit more. I think today's passage is good news for us as we delve into it. There's a lot in there. Don't worry, I'm not going to spend an hour doing everything. But Jesus, as Kaz said, it's the Sermon on the Mount, this kind of famous chunk of teaching he does. And Jesus is a fairly popular person at this time. Just at the end of chapter 4 in Matthew, it says, large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, that's like the 10 cities, in Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. Everybody's following Jesus to try and figure out what he's all about and what he can tell them and how he can help them. And it seems as we go into this kind of little bit, Jesus is kind of withdrawn from the crowds a little bit. We don't know exactly, but it says, the first verse, now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. We don't know, there might have been others about. There's always circles, isn't there? You chat to someone, but someone else kind of hearing your conversation. But he's kind of bringing his kind of followers into this more intimate setting. Because he's got stuff to tell them. And he starts telling them these bold statements about the kingdom of heaven and what it's going to look like. And we're just getting a taster on a Sunday morning. We're just getting like a little taster menu. He's telling them about this kingdom he's come to set in place and what it's going to look like. So I'll read the passages to you again. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad," Jesus says, "because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets, they persecuted the prophets who were before you." You've got all these statements and they begin with this word blessed. And you think, who are the blessed? I know he's talking to his disciples, but what does it mean for them to be blessed? Some translations say blessed, some others say God blesses, some say happy are. And you think, that's a little bit odd, isn't it? Happy are those who mourn? Doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface, does it? Because blessed for most of us usually means we're in a good spot. Life is great, no problems here with me. Blessing usually for most of us relies on our circumstances that we can see and we experience, and they're very real, but they're also very fragile. The Greek word being translated blessed here, so I'll bring a bit of Greek in for those that like a bit of that, is makarios. It means happy, but not in the way we think of happy as being comfortable or being entertained in a particular moment. It's more of a description of who we are or who we can be, kind of irrespective of our immediate circumstances. It doesn't deny difficulty of immediate circumstances, but it tells us who we can be within circumstances. It's a little bit like I do karate, and I've got a certain grade. And sometimes I go in and I absolutely nail it. I remember all the moves, my balance is perfect, my timing's great, and you leave feeling good. Sometimes I go into karate class and I'm losing my balance, and I can't remember anything, and my timing's all off. But my status of my belt and my grade doesn't change. When I'm doing really good, I'm still that same status. When I think I'm doing terrible, I'm still that same status. I'll maybe move up, but it'll be very slowly. That's kind of what's being inferred here. Does my grade change when the circumstances around me change a little bit? What Jesus is saying, kind of being blessed, the state of being blessed doesn't rely on our earthly circumstances. It isn't given just by something that's earthly and finite. You can say, I'm blessed, I'm happy when something good happens, but your state of being blessed doesn't rely on earthly fragile things. It relies on something else. Makarios is a state of existence defined by our relationship with God. A person is blessed in that way from God's perspective, even if the situation doesn't seem that good, because they're in a relationship with Him. You get the job you want, or you don't get your dream job. You're still blessed. You're happy or you're sad. You're still blessed. You're full of energy or you're bedridden. You're still blessed. You've conquered that struggle with sin that you've been battling for ages. Or you've caved in again and it's all gone a bit pear-shaped. You're still blessed. The state of being blessed is to do with our relationship with God. And when Jesus talks about these things, I think in part he's pointing us to him. He's lifting our eyes out of the things that are immediately around us. Jesus isn't daft. He knows we have earthly cares, and I think we'll come to that in next week's passage a little bit. Unless my sermon changes between now and next week, which is always possible. He's not saying there's not circumstances. He's saying that you calling yourself blessed isn't to do with what's just happened around you. It's pulling you out. It's lifting your eyes. It's lifting your soul and your heart to something bigger. Away from what's immediate into a bigger story. It reminds us that even if our circumstances change, our status doesn't. And maybe you just need to hear that this morning. Maybe your circumstances are less than perfect. And maybe that's an understatement. Maybe Jesus wants to lift us up to a bigger story. It's a bit like the sun in some respects. You ever been out in the garden? Happens in Cumbria. It's a sunny day. Let's get the deck chair out. You belt out 5 minutes later. All seems a bit duller than it was before. Some big dark cloud has moved over, hasn't it? What do we say? The sun's gone. The sun hasn't gone. The sun's just been covered a little bit by something that we don't want to be there. But the sun's still in the same place it used to be. Sometimes the covering is fleeting. It's a little bit like sometimes it's a big dark cloud that's there for ages and then it starts to chuck it down. Then you need to run for shelter. Sometimes it's just harder to see and to feel and to understand that you're blessed. And if you're in that situation, that's okay. Jesus doesn't condemn you for just not seeing it or feeling it at the moment. But he's still there. It's a state, blessed is a state of relationship that we can be in with Jesus and with God. And who's it for, is the question. It's for this ragtag bunch of people who Jesus says are the poor in spirit. And you think, who are they? Am I one of them? I hope not. I can't be poor in spirit, surely. I don't want to be poor in anything. But Jesus told a story. It's kind of about this. In a different gospel called Luke. Jesus tells this story. And as I read a few verses, think about who might be the poor in spirit here. Jesus says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men came up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee. They were like the top dogs. Religious dudes, knew everything, knew all the right people, knew all the right words, well respected in society. And the other was a tax collector, the lowest of the low. Whoever that is in your head, whoever the lowest of the low is for you, that's who the tax collectors were. 2 men came up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, another a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector, Jesus says, stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Who do you think the poor in spirit is in that? It's the one that needs and realizes their need for God. It's the one who's willing to take the risk and reach out. It's the one who's not relying on his or her own ability and standing. It's the one that desires God with all their heart. That's who the poor in spirit are. And sometimes we put up barriers to being that. We think we do the right things. But Jesus yearns for that. If that's you today, Jesus yearns for that. Some of the words Jesus says in Matthew, they echo a little bit what's said in Isaiah, a different bit from what Donald read. God says this, these are the ones I look on with favor, those who are humble and contrite in spirit and who tremble at my word. It's one of the simplest things to say, but still one of the hardest. It should be so easy to say, Jesus, I need you. God, I need you. But it seems to be the hardest, doesn't it? I know Elton John sang, sorry seems to be the hardest word. He'd obviously never read about being poor in spirit. Or maybe you find it easy to say, but it's a little bit harder to believe. Maybe there's a little bit holding you back somehow as we try and look in this bigger story. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is Jesus. Blessed are the humble and contrite, for they get Christ. Sometimes we say, I'll believe it when I see it. You ever had that kind of thing? I can do this trick, or I'll see you. Maybe you've got a friend that's always late, and they say, I'll be on time now. This next time I'll be on time. And you're like, yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. Maybe we swap it round when it comes to this. Maybe it's when I believe, I'll see it. When I say I'm poor in spirit, I'll see him. So the question for you today, among many, will you come to Jesus today? That's his request. Acknowledging your need for him. Whether it's all crumbling or whether you think you've got it sorted. Maybe when I read the thing you thought, I'm the Pharisee, and that's quite good, because I know what I'm doing. Or maybe you thought, I'm the tax collector. I've just realized my need for him. But the question is, will you come to Jesus, acknowledging your need for him? Step one. Allow him to bring you into his kingdom and call you blessed. I think it's a question Jesus asks us. He says, will you acknowledge your need for me? So what? So Jesus says, so I can bring you into my kingdom. That's what Jesus wants to do. And he wants to call you blessed. And then when you write #blessed, the good things really will be good when Jesus is in amongst it all. And sometimes the hard things will still seem unbearable. Absolutely. But you'll still be in the kingdom of heaven. And there'll still be a day to come when it will all be worth it. What might you do this week? As you're thinking about this kingdom of heaven, you can read the passage again, the Beatitudes. I've only briefly touched on the first one. Imagine if I went through them all in one sermon. But think about what does it mean. Read them again and again. It's a beautiful passage. Maybe read the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector. It's in Luke chapter 18. And ask yourself, which one am I? Honestly, which one am I? He's not here to condemn, Jesus. If you think I'm the one I don't want to be, he's not here to condemn you. He's here to bring life. Maybe think, what do I mean by blessed when I use it? Am I relying on what Jesus says? Maybe Jesus is saying today, stop trying to work or obey yourself into a position of being blessed. But remember that Jesus has already made the way. 2 weeks ago, when John and Jesus spoke about this kingdom of heaven, they both said the kingdom of heaven has come near. And I said it's like a very deliberate action. It's kind of about, or it's thinking about it, or the kingdom of heaven's floating about. The kingdom of heaven has come near. And Jesus is saying, it's me. I have come near. He's stepped in to our lives and saying, come to me. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who say they need Christ, for they'll get Christ. I think it's a fabulous promise. And if you're kind of here thinking, that seems almost impossible, it's almost impossible that I could be blessed. Or if it is possible, it's probably only a temporary thing. I get that. That's true. We do think it's impossible because that's our earthly thinking. But nothing's impossible with Jesus. We do think it's just temporary because in our little minds, no offense, my little mind, I don't get the big thing all the time. But the kingdom of heaven, being blessed, is very possible and it's very permanent because Jesus says so. It's why we sing, it's why we worship, it's why we come together. And it's why partly we take communion. We take communion to remind one another that this, what Jesus promises, is possible. Not through our efforts, but through his.